So we are recording this morning. And so once again, thanks everybody for coming. Our chance to have a little bit of a conversation and discussion with Cecilia Tan. But before we get started, just a reminder to everybody to please keep your microphones muted. It helps with all of the sounds, things like that as we're going along. And if you have questions as we're going along, please uh, put them in the chat and we will incorporate those in. And then a little bit later, there are opportunities to unmute yourself and ask some questions. But I'm going to start. So probably many of you know, first and foremost, Cecilia from her role with SABR as the publications director, longest serving publications director for SABR. And but Cecilia has a wide and varied history with baseball, and so we want to talk about all of those aspects today. So welcome, Cecilia. Thanks for coming.
Oh, hello. How's everyone out there today?
I think everybody's doing well. Some people got some storms coming and things, but we'll hope that this all goes well. So I know that you're a Yankees fan, Cecilia.
Mm.
And but I am curious where your love of baseball started and where it came from.
Well, my father had the classic story of, being an immigrant to the United States and then Americanizing through baseball. So, and he was in New York City and working at Beth Israel Hospital, um, which, speaking of historians, Beth Israel just closed permanently forever.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, an iconic building in New York City is now, no longer inhabited. So Beth Israel is the hospital that had that round building it's in like the opening of Friends and like many other TV shows set in New York always like pan
Right.
past this building. It's like that's the building where I was born. But yeah, he Americanized by getting into baseball. Apparently he tried football first and was like, why do they play this game outdoors in the winter? My dad came from the Philippines and was like, this is let us get into a summer sport instead. I think. And
A very
then
wise man.
yep, and my mother just told me this last month. Apparently, when they first got together, they lived closer to Queens, and so he tried the Mets, and I guess did not enjoy the experience either. And so we became Yankees fans, or he became a Yankees fan. Um, and thank goodness, I guess. I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say that. But it meant that a lot of my like best childhood memories were all at the stadium because once I also became a baseball fan, you know, would the answer to what do you want to do for your birthday, et cetera, was always can we go to the stadium? Um, the funny thing is that my birthday is in early April, and so the going to the stadium at that point, was often it might be cold, it might be opening day, like that kind of a thing. So, but somehow it magically worked out that every time we went for my birthday, it was 80 degrees and beautiful. So, bring two station wagon loads of girls from New Jersey to, that kind of a thing. So it was just, I don't know. Yeah, I was at Dave Rigetti's no hitter. Um,
Oh, wow.
yeah, I was in high school by then, and just um, yeah, stuff like that. So a lot of great family memories were sort of made at stadium, and just um, yeah, the not that we didn't also do, the things that other families did, like I don't know, Disney World and stuff like that. But yeah, um, I don't know. It never occurred to me to not be a baseball fan. The one thing that I was always a weird kid. I mean, I was always a nerd and but I was also, a tomboy, but I was one of those tomboys who actually like collected baseball cards and read comic books and did a bunch of the other stuff that were sort of, I don't know, performatively boy-like in that era, growing up in the late 60s, early 70s. And there were always boys who were like, "What do you mean there's a girl who collects baseball cards?" And, it was like I was like, "Does it say boys only on these cards? I don't think so. So do you want this Nolan Ryan or not, I don't
Yeah.
know, that kind of thing, right? So just um yeah, yeah, yeah. And then because I was really only interested in the Yankees, I was fleecing the rest of them for,
for
for
so you became everybody's best friend then as a
yeah, basically,
consequence.
because it's like if I, I'm the one who had the Carlton Fisk card that they wanted, and so forth and so on, whatever. Yeah, that kind of thing. So, but
Do you still collect baseball cards?
I do not still collect baseball cards except in a very randomized way, like baseball cards will come to me sometimes, and so those I will keep, if I don't know, every now and then when I've seen that sometimes they sell them at ballparks. Some ballparks sell them, some don't. Some of the minor league parks do them. So it's like I always try to pick up a pack to, just see who's in it and what, I don't know. They're cool. There's some of them are shiny, I mean, baseball cards for me are one of those things that return me to being 10 years old, and it's like,
Yeah.
but I've actually tried not to get too much into the hobby because I'm like, oh, like I need another baseball related obsession, right?
So do you still have your collection from when you were a kid?
Sadly, I do not. My mother was savvy enough to not throw away the comic books, but I don't know whatever happened to the baseball cards. She also doesn't remember what happened to the baseball cards. So I think maybe when I left home, the collection, which was in a shoebox or something, passed to my brother maybe, and then I think maybe there was something happened, like there was a flood in the basement and they got wet and thrown away, something like that, because also, one of the things that I thought we had, but then turned out to be missing by the time I was in my mid-20s was all the scorecards that I had kept from as a kid. My dad and I would keep score at games, and we would trade off actually every inning who was scoring. And honestly, scoring is what made me into like the like deepened my fanaticism for the game so much. I can't even explain it, right? And my dad did not know how to score a baseball game either. We learned from the program book, right?
Right.
Yeah, and there's a little instruction thing in there, and it's like, actually, that was really useful. And we would bring those headphones that were a radio,
Oh
and
yeah.
like we started out with the little red transistor radio, of course, and with the one little earphone, and we would pass that back and forth, and then we upgraded in by the early 70s to these like ones that were a literal, like pair of headphones that you had a little dial on it. And he said he bought them to mow the lawn and listen to the game, and but really we brought them to the stadium, and then whoever was scoring had to be wearing them, and then you tell the people around you what happened, because sometimes there's always something that happens, right, where you're just like, wait, what happened? And then the person with the
And
radio
you got
would
to
be
hear
like,
it.
oh, that was catcher's interference, or whatever.
Right.
That kind of stuff.
So
Hey,
you've had the opportunity as a Yankees fan then from being from a kid all the way up to go to the different stadiums that the Yankees have had.
mhm.
What's your thoughts on those stadiums?
Well, so my first games were at the old Yankee Stadium pre-renovation, but I don't really have a lot of memories of what it was like, other than it was a big stadium, right? It was like, and I do have that memory though of like walking through the dark tunnel and then coming out, and suddenly the field is there and it's so green and it's so huge and whatnot. And then even in the renovated Yankee Stadium, that still happened because they kept that part of the superstructure, and whatnot, where it's like to get like through the upper deck, it's like you went through these like, it almost felt like going through a steam tunnel, right? Where it's like you
Yeah,
you had to go through the concrete body of the stadium, and then you suddenly came out into the bowl. And that was not like by design, right? That was just how they built it, right? It wasn't like they were trying to give fans this epiphany of some kind, but so many people described it, right? And if there's
yeah,
one thing about the new stadium that d does not do that, because the new stadium is so much more open, and as you're walking through, you can see a lot more, and whatnot. It's just completely different design, right? Nobody builds the kind of stadium where you go through a concrete tunnel before you come to a thing, I mean, unless
right.
you're literally in the tunnels underneath, right? And yeah, so the new stadium, though, I mean, it was clear that they were going to have to build something, right? And it wasn't like Fenway where you were, I don't know, there's all these sort of charming quirks that they want to retain and whatever. It was
Right.
just like, yeah. So I have to say I really enjoy the new stadiums, you know, got adequate restrooms, and like
Oh,
uh,
all the necessities for a game.
the food options are so much better. There are some, whatever. The museum is great, so
Right.
I am sad about, that the old stadium is gone, but at the same time, I accepted it as a consequence of change in time, right? So,
Sure.
um, the yeah, yeah, yeah. It certainly could have been worse, but
So, as a Yankees fan,
mhm,
a lot of your writing has certainly stemmed around the Yankees, including
mhm,
your book, The 50 Greatest Yankee Games.
mhm,
Um, and so, while I'm curious about that one in particular, as to sort of what criteria you use to choose the
mhm,
50,
mhm.
do you have favorites? Are there ones that you really struggled to and are now sad that they got left out?
So the thing that was fun about 50 Greatest was actually part of why I became a SABR member was I had started the research for that book. And I don't ask me where I got the idea. I thought what for some reason when I was first starting to write about baseball, I started a blog in 1999, that I thought you had to be special to join SABR for some reason. I don't know. I thought you had to have some kind of credentials or criteria, which of course turned out not to be the case. It's like, oh, you mean you can just send money and they'll start sending you information? Great. You know, I just, yeah. So I had started writing this blog. I was like, I need to know, how do you find out these things? I mean, in 1999, the internet was pretty small compared to now. Libraries weren't online, and here I think I started the book in 2001, so it was like I had written it. So I wrote it, I wrote a check. I mailed it off to Cleveland, right? That was when the SABR office was in Cleveland. And, you know, and they sent me this book literally called How to Do Baseball Research, and I was like, I'm saved. Um, because I was kind of making it up as I went along, right? It was my first
Sure.
nonfiction book contract. It was my first, whatever. And it totally came about because my literary agent, who I had gotten together with because she represents a lot of women's fiction and, erotica and science fiction and fantasy, which is most of, what I had been writing. Um, she's a huge baseball fan also. She's a huge Yankees fan, and we were having lunch like you do with a new client, and we spent the whole time talking about baseball, and then she was like, "Would you like to write a baseball book?" And I was like, I would love to write a book about baseball, but I don't, like I'm not a beat writer. I'm not not Tyler Kepner or, and she was basically like, oh, that doesn't matter. Like she essentially taught me that in the book publishing world, chutzpah is everything, so, she was just like, you could do it, and I'm like, okay, sure. And so we kind of cooked up the 50 greatest concept as a thing of like, here's something that someone who doesn't have an in with a team can do, right? Because I needed to be able to write it without any input from the Yankees at all necessarily, right? Because trying to talk to the Yankees is like trying to get into Fort Knox. It's I mean, and they're still like that, right? It's just the Yankees PR department is there to say no, essentially, to everyone who isn't already credentialed in some way, right? The what's funny is that I ended up getting credentialed and, getting a bunch of their support eventually, but it at the beginning it was sort of like, okay, you know, don't know how this is going to work, right? And so I'm like, well, historical stuff. I mean, obviously I figured I'm gonna call up the Hall of Fame and I'm gonna, whatever. And I'm gonna spend a lot of time looking at microfilm, which is true. The With a title like 50 Greatest, of course, we were like, well, how do you determine what the 50 greatest are? If we were going to do it again now, I mean, I would have done something like put up an internet poll and gotten thousands of people to answer it and, whatever. But it's like you know, in 2000, 2001, it was not that easy to just reach people. I mean, MLB.com didn't exist yet, for example,
Right.
and things like that. And it was just I had started my blog by hand coding it lovingly in HTML1, and it
Oh,
ran
yeah.
on a server that was literally in my basement, like that kind of thing. So, um, and it's just being a nerd was like a job unto itself. Um, and yeah, so Saber was really helpful because it put me in touch with a lot of other people who had, first of all, written books before, and also who then I could send chapters to them and be like, can you any, Saber had a forum at the time, the old
Hmm.
bulletin board forum style, and I would just posted a thing. I'm like, anybody want to read some chapters of my book and tell me if it's terrible? And and people said, sure, I'm happy to, whatever. So people gave me feedback and, also told me things. But yeah, coming up with the list of 50, I was like, with this franchise, there are hundreds of games that are, significant and useful and, this, that, whatever. And the publisher in particular had said, we want a representative sample across all 100 years of the team too. So I was like, okay. So I knew I might have to spread it out a little bit artificially, where I'm like, okay, we got to have some games from pre 1927, we've got to have some, whatever. So the book's chronological. You should be able to essentially get a sense of the history of the whole team by reading it from cover to cover. But of course, that's not what people do. People go and read their favorite game first, and then, you know, but the publisher also, didn't have a lot of experience with sports in particular. That it was, I went with Wiley, which is just, a huge nonfiction
Right.
publisher who publishes every possible subject. So, but they paid very well. So, yeah. And what I did for the ranking system essentially was I came up with my own little system where I was like, okay, I'm going to give a score from, 0 to 5 points, say, for each one of these different criteria. I mean, does this sound like a budding Saber member or what, right? Or it's
Yes.
like, how many Hall of Famers played in this game, future Hall of Famers played in this game? Were any records set or broken? Um, did it have interesting backstory? Like it isn't just a game, maybe it was, the 10th time in that season these teams had met and they hadn't beat them yet, or, whatever. There's sometimes there's a more dramatic backstory than others, et cetera. I think there were 10 or 12 criteria, but it really was the case that we could have, the 50 games I ended up with, I could have picked 50 entirely different games probably and still had, an interesting book. And in the end, I decided I wanted to include all the no hitters and perfect games, just because I'm into pitching and I wanted to put them in. And then I felt like, well, to be fair, then I have to put in all the cycles too, right?
Oh,
So, and just by doing that, that gave me a representative sample across the whole history of the team. And then the rest of the games I filled in, with just, it's like World Series appearances, this, that, the other. And I gave myself the job of picking a heartbreaker from every decade, right? Kind of a thing. So it was like, and I don't know if we ended up with quite 10, but I think that they're, you know, I wanted at least like 1 out of 10 games to be, because some of the greatest games are games that your team loses, even with the Yankees,
yeah.
right? So,
Mhm.
yeah. So, uh, and then, the rankings actually worked out pretty well. And then what I did do with a baseball forum that I was on was then once I had what I considered my list of 50, I had them vote on, the order that they should go in, as well as I ended up taking nominations of, like what else should I what should I put on the alternate 50 list. And it worked out pretty well that, I was like, if this process is legitimate, we're going to end up with, Don Larson's perfect game, um the Bucky Dent game, and what was number 3? And it's too early in the morning and I can't remember which one was number 3, but as the top 3, and that is in fact what happened. So, by the way, say hi to my cat. It's not a Zoom meeting until the cat appears.
Hello.
That's Earl
Yep, you always
Grey.
got to have requisite
Yeah.
animals.
Yeah,
For
that's Earl
sure.
Grey. And yeah, so it worked out pretty well. And then, I got a crash course in Yankees history essentially, um by writing a book. The
Yeah,
so people were like, you just gave yourself a PhD basically in Yankees history. I'm like, yes, I did. I read, 200 books or something leading up to writing one. So,
yeah.
and I'm like that it doesn't everyone, so, but that's the thing too. When I got in, as soon as I got into Saber, people were like, oh, you need such and such book, and you need to read this book, and then you need that, and it's like I'm just building a library. I think in my first 3 years in Saber, I think I read 300 books on baseball. Um,
Wow.
just because I don't know, because I don't do anything halfway, I guess, and just, you
Yeah.
know, so
Well,
every time we went to a new town, I would go to the used bookstore and see what, gems they had, and, that kind of thing. And that's how I ended up with things like a baseball how-to fielding manual, from the 1920s and, stuff like that. And it's
Oh,
just
cool.
you find things,
Oh
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, who's your favorite Yankee,
Babe Ruth.
historically and present day?
Yeah, Babe Ruth. For sure. And people are always like, "What? Why?" And it's like I'm like, "How can it be?" Well, because I'm not just a historian, I'm a storyteller, right? And
Right.
the thing about Babe Ruth is that Ruth transcended baseball to be really uh, an American folk hero. I mean, Babe Ruth is like I don't know, like if there's the canonization process that people have to go through to become saints, right? And it's like if there's a folk hero process, it's like Ruth is just like this far right behind Johnny Appleseed and Paul Bunyan, right? And
Hmm.
Paul Revere, right? It's like uh, just the sociologically, right, Ruth occupies a sort of space in our American mythos, essentially. And that's fascinating to me, you know. And there are other players who are extremely great, but every single place that they slept or ate, there is not a plaque. And like every place that Ruth ever, went, there's a plaque. That kind of a thing. It's like, okay, that's different. That's like American president level of
Right.
whatever.
I was
Like,
thinking George Washington, he
yeah,
slept here, kind of.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly, that kind of thing. And then also some like Roosevelt and some others also have a thing where it's like this hotel suite is where blah blah blah. And you're just like, oh my gosh, interesting. And that it inspires that urge for people to get brass plaques made and affix them to buildings. It's like
Mhm.
like that's the historian impulse though, right? And it's just yeah, so
Absolutely.
Ruth is probably my favorite of all time. And then when it comes to current Yankees, I mean it's probably Aaron Judge, just because you know Judge is doing things that it's like
Yeah.
it's like a guy who is a metaphor for himself. It's like you are bigger than everyone else in the game, literally. And just
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
what? And
Yeah.
just yeah, yeah, yeah. I was at Judge's historic first at bat as a rookie, where he and Tyler Austin went back to back home runs. It was both their debut. They both hit, home run and they were back to back in the lineup. It was the first time that had ever happened in baseball history, and it was another one of those you never know what you're going to see when you go to the ballpark. You might see something you never saw before. And it was like the Yankees were so excited about it that they sent all the season ticket holders Christmas ornaments that year that had Judge and Austin like engraved on
Really?
it.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
as like a commemoration of the event. And it was like, okay, well, I have a lot of weird stuff from the Yankees they sent over the years, and it's like you never know what you're going to get from them as your season ticket holder gift. And sometimes it's like a backpack, and sometimes it's a Christmas ornament with Aaron Judge and Tyler Austin's names engraved on it, So I was like, okay, sure.
That's
Um,
that's really cool.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's just like, and the thing is, I live in Boston, so I don't get to that many games. It's like I have the whole season, but I sell most of them on the internet, right? And it's like,
Right.
and I catch families and friends to go to the stadium a lot as a result. And it's just, I don't know. I happened to be there that day, So it's like, and I was there for Derek Jeter's last game. I was there for, a lot of different things. And then,
That's the fun of baseball, as you point out,
right,
right? You just never
right.
know what you're
You
going to
just never know.
experience.
Right. You never know when it's going to be a stinker or when it's going to be just, like, oh, the best thing about today was we sat outside and ate hot dogs, you know? So,
Because so you write about baseball, and we're going to get back to that.
mhm.
But what I don't think a lot of people know is you've also played.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Such as
And
it
you have
was.
a number of experiences as a player, and I believe you're, uh, I'm not sure about your earliest experiences playing, and I'd
Hmm.
like to hear a little, but I know you played for with the Pawtucket Slaterettes,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
I'm not sure that most people even know who they are.
Right.
But when did you first start to play and decide you wanted to not just be the fan that scored the game, but also to be out there?
Uh-huh. Well, so I think literally my first game I played in was in school. Um, when I was 10, we moved from where we'd been living in sort of northern New Jersey, which was closer to the city. My dad had moved from working in the hospital to being in private practice. And so to be closer to the hospitals he was then working in as a surgeon, we moved to central New Jersey from northern New Jersey, which sadly put us further from the stadium. But it also put me into a school system that was very different and where we had the classic childhood experience of getting picked last for a team. you know and it was like, okay, and when I was 10 I was pretty small still. I'm still pretty small. And I'm in a school where I know nobody, and we had this like kind of traditionalist gym teacher who was like, today we will play baseball, whatever, and he picked two kids as the captains, whatever, and then they so, a gym class is only like 45 minutes long anyway. If you spend the first 20 minutes of the game picking the teams, I think it basically reduces the amount of time that the kids could potentially get hurt while playing the actual game. And, you know, um, which is, now that I think about it, was probably smart on his part. But, at the time was kind of like, okay, I guess this is how we do it, whatever. And then everyone, two benches, right? And you sit in the order that you were picked, and then we bat in the order that you were picked. And of course, it was, I don't know. And the gym class was like two classes combined together. So it was like 40 kids, right? So um, it meant that I went 3 weeks before we had a game where it went fast enough that I actually got up to bat, right? Um, and and they stuck me in the outfield, a couple of times, right? But because you have to rotate through so everyone actually gets to play, but a lot of the playing is just standing there, right? So the but I really wanted to play. I really wanted to try, but like no one really told me what to do either, was the thing, is that, there was no instruction of any kind. You were just supposed to already know by the time you're 10 how to play this game, right? And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm just going to figure this out as we go along. And the first time I got up and hit the ball, I was so stunned that I was like, like almost like I didn't know what to do, right? And then someone yells, "Run, run!" And so I ran. And, it was just like, I didn't necessarily expect that I was going to make contact on my first swing, right? But um, I had terrible eyesight, but good hand-eye coordination. So, I just and I have good beginner's luck at a lot of things where, the very first time I try it, I'm like, oh, okay, that was pretty good. Um, and it turns out that I learn a lot. I later got a degree in cognitive science, and I learned that I have strong mirror neurons. I learned by watching, um, and that you can watch something happen a lot of times, and if you have strong mirror neurons, your all the cells in your body essentially are going through the process as if you're doing it, even though you're just watching it being done, right? It's like your body is mapping onto, and not everyone has this such strong mirror neurons. I mean, some people don't have them at all, and they have to just literally be handed
Right.
through everything. I later became a professional ski instructor and learned a whole bunch about biomechanics and, how we learn and how we teach, reflexes and, things like that. And half of teaching skiing is tricking people into doing it correctly and then hoping that once they do it right, they're like, oh, okay, now I understand, and then, yeah, um, that kind of a thing. So yeah, I had that but yeah, I had that classic experience of being picked last. And then it was, even though this was, the era when there had just been sort of the landmark case against Little League to allow girls to play and whatever, it's like there was no concept that girls could go to play Little League. It's like the two things I wanted to do were karate and or some kind of martial art and baseball, and I had to wait until I was an adult to do both. So,
Yeah.
and yeah, in college I got into Taekwondo, and that was many, many decades ago, and now I'm still in it. I'm still teaching it. But then yeah, so baseball had to wait until I was in my 30s, basically. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it was Justine Siegel, who out there on that early internet, just somebody was like, "Oh, you should, you know, here's this woman, you should email her and find out if there's anything near you," kind of a thing. And I emailed Justine, and she was like, "How about the Pawtucket Slaterettes? Are you within driving distance of them?" And I was like, Actually, I am. When it's not trafficy, I'm only 50 minutes from Pawtucket. And then when it is trafficy, of course, it's 2 hours and 50 minutes, but that's another story, right? Um, yeah, so I emailed them out of the blue, and Deb Betancourt emailed me
Mhm.
back to say, "Oh, we're having open tryouts are in 2 weeks or something," and I was just like, "Oh my God, 2 weeks, I'm out of shape." But so is everybody. I mean, it's a lot of, and the thing that's fun about the Slaterettes is that essentially the 16 and up girls play with the adults, and so you had women who played in the league when they were little, and then they got up to older ages, then they went away, went to college or whatever, and then they came back to Pawtucket, got married, had kids, and then their daughter was in the league. And so then by the time they get to then mothers and daughters could be playing on the same team together. And
Cool.
let me tell you, you haven't lived until you've played on a team that has a mother daughter catcher pitcher battery, you know, where you catchers can give pitchers some attitude sometimes, and it's just like the get the ball, throw it back and be like, "Come on, mom," you know, just like, yeah, that kind of stuff. So it's just an incredibly fun league to play. And the Slaterettes are, for those who don't know, were the first all girls Little League equivalent in the United States, where essentially right around the same time as the landmark case in the 70s, there was some parents who, had a little girl who wanted to play, and then they were like, but she'll be like the one in her Little League then, and that's not really fair to her either, even if legally she's, why don't we just start a league for girls? And so they did. They started a league in the 70s, and then it's continuously operating. It's a park league, so it's just like Babe Ruth baseball or Pony League baseball or whatnot, except for girls. In fact, they right when I started was when they had just gotten their own dedicated field that was built to women's size. So instead of a 90-foot base path, we had an 85-foot base path, I think.
Okay.
And which is the same as Pony League, or one of the other junior baseball leagues, also has this slightly smaller field. And then the pitching distance was also slightly shorter, and we're all slightly shorter, so it just made sense to us. Um, the fence was still, I think, just as far, but it was, at least it felt like it. But yeah, yeah, yeah. So I played for a couple different teams there, and the first year that I played, though, I played on Narragansett Electric because, of course, in the park leagues, you're named for your sponsor. So we had, Pelagi's ice cream and so forth. Um, I later played on Pelagi's ice cream, but Narragansett Electric, which is the electric company in Rhode Island, right, or was before it got bought by, I don't know, National Grid or whoever, right? That year they decided to kind of to put all the old lady rookies together, right? Because there were me and a bunch of other women who all had come to this tryout, right? So they put us all together on one team, and thinking that this would be a way to balance, because then all these hot young teenagers and whatever who've been playing and whatever, they were like, I think they were worried that, I don't know, um, I don't know, somehow it wouldn't be balanced enough. And in the end, we beat everybody. And all these people who had never played, right? But it was like, but we were really patient at the plate, and we all had high on base percentage because of it. And just, no, absolutely nobody in the league hits for power. You know, so it didn't matter if you're, 40-year-old woman with, whatever, with creaky knees, because it's like speed isn't everything. And you know,
Right.
and you don't need speed at all when you walk. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I had something like a 500 on base percentage that first year. Um, and and it was not like it was like a small strike zone either. I mean, it was a very big
Right.
strike zone because otherwise the game would never end, right? And it was still just, I don't know, it was great fun. And like an old coach had come out of retirement to coach the old ladies, and so the old lady team basically, yeah. Because we also practiced more. So
Of course.
our coach was like, "Well, we don't have a game tomorrow. Who can make it to practice?" And I was like, "I'll come to Rhode Island for practice, sure." I was a little underemployed at this point. Also, was the thing. So, I was like, I don't have anything better to do right now because, as a freelance writer, it's like if nobody's paying me to do a thing and I'm not on deadline, well, sure, of course I can come play baseball. Um,
How many
but
seasons did
yeah,
you play in
yeah.
Pawtucket?
I think I played 5 seasons.
Okay.
And then I turned 40 essentially, and in particular, my eyes turned 40, and it just became too difficult to see the ball in the twilight. We played on a
Sure.
field without lights, and by the end of August in New England, by 7:30 p.m. it's getting pretty dark, you know,
Right.
and it
Yeah.
just it just wasn't safe for me to be in the batter's box anymore. Basically, I was like, I can't see the ball at all, you know. So yeah, I was like, I understand why people were, and it was, like, yeah, also my knees were getting creakier and all that kind of thing. But it's like I would have put up with all those things, but the not being able to see in the dark was the thing that really was the kicker. I was like, all right, it's time for me to retire. Yeah. So um, and
But
and
that
spend
wasn't the,
time in front of computers, which is also not great for your eyes, but you know.
but my understanding is that wasn't the end of your playing day
Mhm.
entirely.
Um, well, also when then there's the 24-hour game,
Right. Yeah.
right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Actually, I was still pretty active with the Slaterettes at the time when the 24-hour game came up because so for those who don't know about it, there was a 24-hour long marathon baseball game called 24 Hours for Africa that a guy named Rob Novotny, who had been a scout for the White Sox and this and that, and then somehow got involved in women's baseball. I think because he was dating a woman baseball player, actually.
Yeah.
And I think they got married, actually, now that I think about it.
They, yeah, they
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. And like a lot of guys go through this thing of being like, wait, what do you mean? What do you mean women can't play baseball? Wait, what? How did we get to this period where, like, I don't know, like, you know, th a lot of people go through this little epiphany where they're like, wait a second, there's nothing about testosterone attached to the ball. Like, wait, how did we get to this thing that's like baseball is for boys, softball is for girls? And in other countries, it's not like that.
Right.
It's like something about, I don't know, American machismo that makes it this way or something, right? And I'm like, well, okay, we could write whole books about what made it that way, but and he wanted to do a thing for a charity and whatnot. So it was for um, a charity called U.S. Doctors for Africa, which were sort of providing anti-AIDS medication and treatment for women in mining towns in South Africa in particular. Um, and so sort of like Doctors Without Borders, but for this one specific issue.
Right.
And yeah, and they had players. So Rob went that whole summer around to all the different women's baseball leagues that he could find and ran a little like fielding and hitting clinic at each one, and then a recruitment essentially to come play in the game. And like a lot of marathons, you sort of have to raise money to get on the roster. Um, and the I don't do anything halfway, of course. And so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna play in this game. I'm gonna, whatever. I'm gonna raise money for my airfare to get there and whatnot. You know, I had a garage sale. I emailed every person I'd ever known. I did, I contacted SABR members. I did, whatever. And I think I raised somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000, which apparently was
Wow.
a lot more than everyone else because that's how I made it into the starting lineup of the 24-hour game. Was by being the GameStop fundraiser. So that means that I was the starting second baseman in the women's 24-hour game. And it meant that I had to play 3 times because the way the game worked was you had a squad of 9 and you played for 2 hours and then you rotated out essentially and were replaced
Okay.
by a new squad every 2 hours. But then, yeah, the group that played first then had to play more times, so it's like,
Yeah.
I had my starting at bat, at noon, but then I was up again at, I don't know, 6 p.m. and then again at midnight and then again at 6 a.m. or, whatever it was. I can't remember what the exact schedule was, but it was, yeah, I just remember warming up at like 4 a.m. at one
Wow.
point. after having slept for 2 hours on the floor of the clubhouse of the Arizona Diamondbacks stadium in Tucson, which is where this all took place. And it was super fun though. And it was just, I mean, still one of the transcendent experiences of my life was playing catch at 4 a.m. with a Japanese player with whom I really didn't have any common language. She didn't really speak English, and I didn't, I spoke 10 words of Japanese, and she spoke 10 words of English. But you don't need to speak a language to play catch with somebody, right? And it was like we're on the same squad, and it was just like, so yeah, so there we are in a pitching tunnel under the stadium at 4 a.m. trying to get and we were the two oldest players basically. I was already older than everyone else, right? Approaching 40. She was also approaching 40. So there we are. The two old ladies are warming up together. But the thing was, we were not the oldest people who ended up playing in that game because we had some All-Americans who were there. Janine Lesko and a couple others were there as like line coaches and whatnot. And at 3 a.m. when no one and when everyone else was like, "Oh, my arm hurts," whatever, Jeannie Lesko took the mound and pitched for an hour instead of coaching third base. And it was
Wow.
just like, okay, so she activated herself onto the roster and went in and pitched, and it was just like, holy crap, you know. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the only sad thing about it is that because it was 3 a.m. not that many people were watching. It was like it was all
Sure.
streamed live on Apple. Apple had some kind of educational video platform at that time, and so there was no streaming television yet, really,
Right.
in that era. But it was, yeah,
So you
it was,
guys got to witness history, but not too
yeah,
many other people, unfortunately.
yeah,
What a cool
yeah, yeah.
experience. So just a reminder to everybody, if you have questions, please put them in the chat, because we want to give you that opportunity as well. Um, about how many women do you think played in that 24-hour? Any sense of,
Somewhere I have the complete rosters, I think, but
oh,
I think we were
cool.
essentially in two teams. I think they split the teams, split everyone
Right,
who came into two teams and then split the teams into separate squads and whatever. And it was something, the number turned out to be something like 73 on each squad or something like that, or on
right,
um on each side. And then there were some people who kind of by the end of the game, because you have to put 9 people on the field,
right.
we're just like switching uniforms and then going back out there, whatever, that kind of thing. I think the final 2 hours was originally meant to be like an all-star collection, and really it was like whoever was still standing. So, you know,
Whoever was awake, whoever wasn't hurt.
right,
It's,
right, that kind
yeah,
of thing. And yeah,
what a cool
uh,
experience.
yeah, it
Have you
was really,
played since, or was that your last?
I think I played one more season with the Slaterettes after that, actually. And then that was when I was like, okay, yeah, this is really not safe for me or anyone else anymore because, the beginning of the season's fine, but yeah, by mid-August it's just like, yeah, I don't know. So, yeah,
So
I packed it in.
you packed it in and turned back
Mhm.
to the full-time writing side of and
Right.
editing side of things, and that
Hmm.
brought you into Saber in a much larger passion because in
Yep.
addition to your own writing, you have
Right.
served as the publications director. How did
Mhm.
that come about, and what's that experience been like?
It's been really great. And the thing that's kind of funny was that like a lot of things in the world of freelancing, I came to it almost by accident, right? Where it's like, freelance writing is a great way to turn anything you're passionate about into a job, basically. But I seem to have this magical ability to turn anything that I'm passionate about or good at into a job. So, like I ended up
Hmm.
being a ski instructor. I don't know, things like that. Or now I'm a Taekwondo instructor, just I don't know. I tend to end up in charge of things. So, there's always a vacuum at the top, it seems like, where somebody needs to do something and then I'll just do it. But yeah, what happened with Saber was, the right after I joined, the convention was here in Boston. Um, and Bill Nowlin, who literally lives like half a block from me, um, was like, we're going to try to do this thing where we're going to get everybody at the game to try to write about it. And because Bill, even at that time, had a lot of good contact with the Red Sox, was like, so let's get a Saber member to sing the national anthem, and we'll get somebody placed inside the Green Monster, and we'll have, whatever. And so 700 Saber members are at that game, and then about 70 of them each turned in some form of either an essay or a poem or took photos or, this, that, and the other. And then we had just people all over the place. And then some people just sat in the Saber section of the stands, right? And like one guy wrote about the umpires, and one guy wrote about his birthday, and whatnot. And still to this day, one of my favorite essays ever is Irv's story of his birthday. But Irv Goldfarb, who's a Mets
Yeah.
fan, yeah,
Yes, he
um,
is.
just a great piece, right? A great
Yeah.
piece about loving baseball and loving life, right? And then Bill was like, I don't know what we're gonna do with it though, once we have all these things. And he was like, is it gonna be a website? Is it gonna be whatever? So we had a meeting, um, and I looked at the amount of material it was, and I'm like, Bill, this is the perfect amount of material for a book. Let's just do a book, and there was a question, I guess, of whether it was just gonna be like a Boston chapter
Right.
production or what. And then um, Bill wasn't on the board yet, and we were just two volunteers who were like, yeah, let's put on a show kind of a thing. And I was just like, you edit the pieces, go through them and just, whatever. Bill had never edited a book before. And I was like, oh, to proofread it and do this, that, and whatever. And then give it all to me and I'll do the layout and, you know, well, the next thing I know, he's like, Rounder Records, which is, Bill is the founder of
Right.
Rounder Records. He's like, we've been thinking about starting a book division. And and I'm like, okay, well, here's how book production works. And if you're gonna, you get a distributor, and then they go and solicit how many copies bookstores want, or at least that's the way book industry used to work. And then if you need to print like 2,000, you're gonna, your printing cost is gonna be under $2 a copy, and anything you can do to increase that, that print run reduces the unit cost. And then, he was like, well, let's talk to Saber, see if they want any copies. And the next thing we know, I think we made a deal for Saber to take 5,000 copies or something and send it to every member, because if you're going to print 7,000 copies, well, now we're getting cost of printing down to like $1 a book, and that was back when shipping a book was like $2, right? So the board was essentially like, you're telling us we could send this publication to every single member for $3 each, and which at the time was a pretty small line item, I guess, on Saber's
Yeah.
total budget. And at the time, I guess the board had wanted there to be 4 publications per year, and there was sort of an empty slot, and they were like, all right, we'll do it. This is, um, and then, so all of a sudden, Bill and I are a editing team, and and it was like, okay, what are we gonna do next? So
Cool.
so then we're like, all right, well, we were trying to keep the Boston chapter,
Right.
enthused because of the, after the convention and whatnot. So then we did, and the bio project had just launched, right? So it was like, well, how are we going to get people to write the bios of the, the scrubs, or the guys who just got a cup of coffee? And like everyone wants to write Carlton Fisk and,
Right.
that kind of thing. But, who wants to write, I don't know, like, yeah, the guy who only got 2 at bats, and, and Bill said, well, the way to do it is we should just have a book that's everyone on this, the 67 Red Sox, everyone on the 75 Red Sox, whatever. So I can't remember whether we did 67 or 75 first, but then,
Okay.
and that all of a sudden set the template essentially for bio project
Right.
book projects. And the purpose of it was to spur people to write the bios of the guys who were less exciting, or less known,
Yeah.
right? And of course, Saber members jump into that where the people are like, I want to write the guy that nobody's heard of.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was great. And so we did a couple of those, and those also became, Saber publications. And the next thing you know, they're like, maybe we should get these uh I don't know, these eager beaver volunteers more involved. And, so the next thing you know, right, Bill's on the board, and then they were essentially like, we need to hire a new publications director. And the book industry was going through drastic changes through this period too.
Sure.
So between 2002 and 2012 or 2011, when I took over, we had essentially literally thousands of bookstores go out of business. Amazon come along, ebooks finally arrive. And then of course the whole way academic publishing works has completely changed over
Right.
the last, 20 years too. So it's been,
Yeah.
now it's standard for things to be published open access on the web first before they appear in the
Right.
library edition of things. And, so yeah, Saber's just been trying to roll with the changes,
Cool.
because, yeah, publications is a big part of the mission,
Yep,
partly to spur more research, right? It's like when people
sure.
feel like they have a chance at publication, they're gonna, be
So we
motivated.
got a few questions.
Sure.
So our first one is from Amy, and she asks, people tend to have strong opinions when anybody puts out a book ranking baseball moments. What was the reaction to your book,
Hmm.
especially as a woman writer?
I didn't get a lot of like, well, little lady, you don't, whatever. Which I thought I would actually, but I went around and did presentations when the book came out, both to SABR chapters and then to like just at bookstores and stuff, where I um had a little signboard with the top 10 games sort of hidden, and then I would reveal them. It's very low
Yeah.
tech, right? Kind of peeling off a thing, whatnot. And like a countdown from 10 to 1,
Right.
whatnot like that. And because debating which games belong on where and whatnot is part of the fun of the thing. Like literally the big engagement with the audience was always that, right? So, and I almost regret that there wasn't more internet, or social media didn't exist yet, because we would have had
Sure.
so much fun with people debating it and arguing over it and whatnot. But yeah, the so yeah, I was kind of expecting there to be more pushback than there was. If anything, the only pushback I get is from like crusty old Saber members and whatever, is that they didn't like that in my blogs about it I used bad words. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
which I
Yeah.
think is the funniest thing ever.
Yeah.
Which I don't think that well, then again, I take it back. I was going to say I don't think they would say that to a male writer, but then there were people who complained, for example, about Jim Bouton using bad words.
Right.
So
Sure.
apparently, yeah, that just there are
It
some
was
people
just,
are
yeah.
just against us using bad words because it's rude, or whatever.
Okay.
So maybe that
Great.
wasn't even sexism. Maybe that was just
Yeah. Just so we have another question from Ryan. It says, you've already touched on your personal experience, but
Mhm.
for anyone wanting to write more about baseball, is there a risk of not being taken seriously if you are a nerd with a lot of interests who writes about other things? Or does that not really exist and it's just internalized imposter syndrome?
Um, that's imposter syndrome talking, if it's you're especially if you're talking about yourself, Ryan. But no, it's true that you look around at Saber members who can, I don't know, like quote the batting averages of the whole, 1927 Yankees and, things like that. And it's like that's a different kind of knowledge from, there's a lot of different kinds of knowledge, right? And particularly as writers and researchers, our job isn't to memorize a bunch of stuff. Our job is to contextualize it, you know. Um, and there's a lot of different kinds of learning. There's a lot of different kinds of, and the thing is, nobody nobody exists in a vacuum. I mean, that first book, 50 Greatest, I was like, I've never written a history book before. I'm just going to go to other Saber members and find out, am I doing it right? Am I getting it right? And, and any mistakes that still appear in the book are my fault and not theirs. But I got great advice from some of them who were just like, because what I was doing is each game, instead of just writing what happened in the game, because I was under a sort of mandate to tell the history of the whole team through these 50 games, to make it readable, I had to contextualize everything, so what's happening in sort of team development, what's happening in baseball as a whole, what's happening politically in the country, stuff like that. And it and people were like, "Oh, this is great," because that's part of what makes it fun and interesting, right? Is what was happening in, I don't know, Watergate or whatever,
Right.
um, that kind of stuff. Or, one of the games that's in there is the game after Thurman Munson's funeral, where
Oh,
they
yeah.
flew the whole team to Ohio, you know, did the funeral, then they flew them back to New York and they had to play a game, right? And Bobby Mercer, who was Thurman's, good friend who had delivered the eulogy, ends up getting the game-winning hit in a come from behind victory that night. And it was just like, you can't make that up. I mean,
Right.
so that game's in there, yeah,
Yep.
that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So,
So
yeah.
following up on that,
Mm.
another question, this one's from Jay. It says, a writing advice question for you.
Mm.
When writing history, to what extent do you recommend following fiction conventions in choosing the plot?
Mm.
Specifically, do you strive to choose a specific protagonist and give that person anything like an arc of learning? Do you seek to find an antagonist and follow such other story structure conventions in a nonfiction history work?
Um, a little bit. I mean, like I was saying, here I had to write 50 different, essentially short stories about the New York Yankees, right? And I couldn't change what happened in the game, like that's a fact, right? But I could change the way I contextualized it, right? So it's like, all right, yeah. So in the the post Munson game, yeah, Mercer is the protagonist in that way. And so that's the chapter where you're going to get the little bio of how everyone wanted Bobby Mercer to be the next Mickey Mantle, but he wasn't, that kind of a thing. And that, he was a great player who had to be judged on his own merits and not the fact that because he was also from Oklahoma and also played center field for the New York Yankees, like on and on, that kind of a thing.
Right. Sure.
And uh yeah, that kind of stuff. So the thing about storytelling is that you're always sort of looking for the angle of, like how do I enter the story so that other people will feel what I'm feeling,
Right.
right? It's like, um, and you can't, of course, control what your reader thinks or feels. You can only put your stuff out there and then, you've done 50% of the work. And then the reader takes the words in through their eyeballs and then they create a picture in their mind, right? That's the other 50%. And you can never control more than 50% of it, right? So the best you can do is to be as accurate and evocative as you can, right? And sometimes that's going to mean, yeah, taking maybe a more fictional-ish, fiction-like approach. I don't think there needs to be antagonists. I don't think there necessarily needs to be a redemption arc, for example. But boy, when there is, don't we get more invested in the story? So
Absolutely.
I mean, why are we so into sports rivalries? Why are we, whatever? And that's why, because and
Yep.
then the thing that just you see happen over and over again with baseball is people being like, wow, you couldn't make that up, right? Like if I were going to write a Hollywood movie about a baseball team, whatever, it's like it couldn't get better than what just actually happened. And that's one of the things that amazes us, right? Is that it
Right.
comes out story-like. And
Yeah.
well, it's our brains that make it story-like, but
Sure.
baseball has a structure that allows for things to happen, and that's one of the things that's made it so enduring, right? So,
So John Racanelli has comment
mhm.
and then as he says a half serious question. He just says, I want to thank you for all of your help over the years for me and other amateur writers like me. And his half serious question, he says, is when do you sleep?
Yeah,
Um,
I know. John, have you gotten an email from me at 4 a.m.? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and you
I
respond. Yeah.
well, the secret is actually that it's not a secret. Is that I have a sleep disorder called delayed sleep phase syndrome, which is that, like when you're a teenager, you start staying up later and later, and then you stop being able to get up in the morning, and you're just like, I need to sleep. Mom, leave me alone. I want to sleep. For me, that didn't really come on until I was really in college. Possibly because I had such strict sleep hygiene when I was in high school because I had to be on a marching band field at 7 a.m. every day. And so I just maintained really, really good sleep hygiene until I went to college. And then delayed sleep phase syndrome came on. And then it's like you just never get out of that phase. So yeah,
There
so
you
my
go.
my normal bedtime is like 4 a.m., right? And I just don't get sleepy
There-
until
Well,
morning. And then in the morning I'm like, okay, now I want to sleep.
now you want to
Um,
sleep.
right.
So,
So what happens is that I work a double work day, but I've split it up in so I'm asleep in the morning. I'm just not available in the morning, and this is one of the reasons to be a self-employed freelance writer.
sure.
Is that you
Yeah.
get set on a schedule, and then yeah, so I'm normally asleep at this time, or I'm usually awake by 11, but I'm often asleep,
Well,
and
we
then
appreciate you
yeah,
getting up this
yeah,
morning
and then
early.
I work all afternoon and into the evening, which is a normal-ish time for people to work, right? And then I go off and teach Taekwondo and make dinner and watch the game, et cetera, et cetera. And then I sit down to work again at, 10 p.m. or midnight, and I work until 4 a.m. Um, and I don't recommend this, by the way, as a like, like this is my secret to how you can do more. It's just just
It
works
just,
out that way.
yeah,
And then,
yeah,
and that isn't every day. There's also days
sure,
where there are, I don't know, social plans and, things and whatever. And then there's nights when, it's like, yeah, we watch the game and then we just surf YouTube for a couple of hours.
right,
So,
yeah,
yeah, that kind of
yeah,
thing. Or, read books, etc. And that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's like I don't get sleepy until the sun is starting to come up. This is where vampire legends come from, right? It's like I just don't get sleepy until the sun starts to come up, and then I'm like, oh, now I'm tired, and then I
yeah,
collapse. Yeah, so yeah, that's just I don't know. That's just how it is.
yeah,
So, but yeah, I don't recommend it as a technique, unless you have this chronotype, and then if you
right.
do, then yeah, it's like
It
arrange
works,
your life so that you can sleep when you're actually sleepy, and you can get a lot more done because then your brain is awake the rest of the time.
right?
Uh, yeah,
Makes
yeah,
sense. So I realize we've gone past the hour, but if you have time for one more question, Cecilia,
sure.
Karen
Hmm.
has had her hand up while we've
Oh, I
talked through
see.
all of these, and I don't want to miss or any of Karen the last chance. So Karen, if you want to unmute yourself, you have a question.
Okay, I have a question. What were the easiest 50 people when you were choosing the 50 people? What was the easiest one? I know Babe Ruth would be the easiest.
Mm,
What would be the toughest?
it's a good question. I don't know. So the thing with the Yankees is it's always because there's so much. It's always about narrowing it down, right? And you're just like,
Yeah.
you know, do you include this guy? Do you include that guy? And the hard one for me also was trying to figure out what was the first game that I was going to put in, right? And the because the team was not good for the first 20-ish years, right? Um, and that's why I decided that the first game in the book, chronologically speaking, had to be the first big heartbreaker, right? Which is that Jack Chesbro or Cheesebro um, literally throws away the season where there was no World Series that year. It was 1904. And 1904, is that right? This is me and numbers don't always get along. So, but it was like the Giants had won the National League and they were like, we're not going to bother to play you upstart American leaguers this year, right? It was so there's like that's why there's a gap, right? It's like they played in 1903 and they didn't play in 1904 and then they played again in 1905 because the money was too good to say no. But so the American League pennant is the World Series that year for
Yep.
those teams, right? And it was Yankees Red Sox, right? So it's like the rivalry goes back a really long time. And they had a double header, and it was like um the first and you don't see games like this anymore, right? Chesbro was the I can't remember the exact numbers, but had pitched something like, I don't know, pitched on 2 days rest like 6 times that year. And, I'm just an unbelievably huge number of starts, all of them complete games, so forth and so on. So his arm is basically falling off by the end of the season. Um, but, you know, and he probably threw some, doctored pitches of different kinds because it wasn't illegal at that point to throw the spitball, to throw the, whatever. And of course the balls would get very dirty at that time. This is before they would clean them up, or replace them as the game went along. And they literally lose this game on a wild pitch that he throws toward the end, right? And it was like all there were 25 newspapers in New York at that point. Every single one of them wrote, like a eulogy about it, where it was just like it was the most heartbreaking pitch in the history of baseball. And baseball, 1904 hadn't not been around for hundreds of years at that point, right? And it was just like, so it was like the odes that people wrote to it. And I was like, okay, obviously it has to be this, like, you know, the pitch heard round the world, kind of a thing where it's like literally threw the season away, and just, I was like, okay. So then, of course, I wanted to know more about him and so forth and so on. And it just, yeah. And how his wife, after he died, had a lifelong campaign to get it changed from wild pitch to passed ball and unsuccessfully never did get it
Right.
changed in the official record, and whatever, but like, like spent decades essentially lobbying the American League office and whatever to change it, and just like, wow,
And
okay, like that's pretty big, right? And that's
yeah,
scoring the game. It
it's
all comes back
amazing.
to scoring the game, right? So,
Thank
yeah,
Wow.
you.
Very cool.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that's awesome. You are a wealth of knowledge, Cecilia, and we really thank you for coming on this morning and sharing with us. And thank you, everybody, for coming. Just a
Thank
couple
you.
of reminders before you all take off. Our women's baseball conference, our virtual, is coming up September 19th to 21st. You can go on the SABR website and see all of the details about it. And then join us again in October for Cat Williams, in November for Naomi Ryan, and in December for Katie Woods. And so thank you. And as you can see, Cecilia, lots and lots of this was amazing. You're wonderful. Thanks to, and so we really appreciate it. So thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and we hope to see you in a couple weeks at our women's baseball conference, which is co-sponsored by Sabre and the IWBC. So
Woo!
lots of cooperation. So thanks, everybody. And
Thank
thank you,
you.
Cecilia. This was fun.
You're welcome. Thank